Hello! Welcome to the Unleashing the Authentic Artist Summit. My hope here is to give you tools, ideas, inspiration, motivation to help you break through barriers that are blocking your greatness so you can live authentically, passionately, and creatively and courageously. Today, my guest is my dear friend and teacher, Neil Semer. Neil is a world-renowned teacher of singing, and he has students on Broadway, the Met, all over the world, and I am so excited that he has joined us here. Welcome, Neil. Hello.
It's so good to be here, Heather. Great to see you.
So great to see you. Neil, just give us a little bit about your background and where you came from and what brought you here and why singing for,
Well, I came from a completely unmusical family, which is very strange. But I grew up on like Frank Sinatra records and Broadway show albums because that was all that my parents had in the house, and I would just devour them as a child. And there was when I was there were family movies of me as an infant. I would carry around these 45 RPM. I'm sure most of your audience will not even know what those are, but they were these small little records that you would put on a play player. I would carry that record player wherever I went as a 2-year-old. I would open it up and rock myself over it while the sound came into my chest. Music was obviously somehow just very soothing and innately needed by me. And then it kind of went dormant because I came from an unmusical family. And then I did request piano lessons, which my parents gave me when I was entering adolescence, and then my voice changed, and then that changed everything because having my own deep voice was heaven. It was a blessing. It got me through my adolescence. And I just developed this great passion for singing, and I started studying, and I just became a voiceaholic, I guess you could say. It was just truly a passion. And I moved into New York. I was very lucky. I got my first professional engagement when I was still 17. I hadn't graduated high school yet, but I lied about my age. And I was a soloist at Radio City Music Hall just after rehearsals. It was after my 18th birthday. And from then on, I lived in New York and lived the young artist life and studied voice and dance and acting and Italian and yoga, and this course of study of my own devising. I didn't go to school at that point. And then when I was 23, I did decide to go back to school, and I was trying to decide, do I want to go back for acting or singing? And I ended up going to Manhattan School of Music. And by the time I was a junior at Manhattan, I was teaching voice as my profession. And I started by teaching the entire staff of the Cafe Figaro in Greenwich Village because I was a waiter there, and someone asked me, do you know of a good cheap voice teacher? And I said, yeah, me. And pretty soon the entire staff was studying with me. And that was the beginning of my international singing career. And, at this point, my main studio was in New York, but I teach on a regular basis in Toronto, Berlin, Paris, London, Copenhagen, Amsterdam, several other cities in Europe. Many times I've been to Australia. I presented for a lot of Nats conferences and other sorts of vocal congresses. And my students sing in opera and the biggest opera houses in the world, in music theater around the world and on Broadway, as well as rock and pop people. I really enjoy the mix of expressive singing.
Well, so it was at a Nats convention that I first heard you do a masterclass, and I was enthralled. And you were teaching and talking about how to sing with your emotions, and it was right then and there that I turned to my mother, who you've worked with, but I turned to her and I said, I need to study with him. And she went, yes, she totally agreed. Right there. And
I'm so glad she said that.
Yeah, I was like, and I need to know him. So, which has definitely been a blessing to me in so many ways. I kind of, as I think about your teaching, I think it's like the Zen of voice. You know, I've come away from your studio with absolutely no tension in my throat and in my voice, and then like in my heart, I feel just totally free. And you said something just a second ago where you would lie on the record and it would fill your chest.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, that's really interesting because you're so connected to that chest resonance in your teaching. Yeah. Where did that, I mean, like, okay, from a young age, obviously you loved feeling that chest resonance, but where did that come from? Because I
You know,
like that primal place.
it's not, I'm not sure where some of it came from, honestly. I was very influenced, speaking of Zen, there's a very short little pamphlet that's well known in the classical vocal community called Vocal Wisdom, and it's the Maxims of Giovanni Battista Lamperti. And actually, when you read it, there's no vocal science in it because Lamperti taught before vocal science existed. But it's very, it reads almost like it's a Buddhist book. It's very Zen. And that was my first voice teacher did introduce me to that book, which I devoured over and over again. And it really became the core tenet of the way I saw singing. And what I endeavored to do after reading that book many, many times was to understand and contemporary vocal science, how it related to this philosophy that I knew was intuitively, was just so right. I was also a kind of performance nut, and I was lucky. I moved into New York when I got that job I told you about at the age of 18, and I was one of those people who would stand at the Met. I'd get up at 4 or 5 in the morning sometimes to hear some of the greatest singers of the day. It was worth it back then to hear some of these incredible people, and also, you know, get half-price tickets for Broadway shows. So I was at the theater like 4 times a week probably. Just that was such an incredible education for my ears and my point of view and seeing what great art was and could be. And so my aesthetic was really formed by an older generation that I really look back on with incredible love and gratitude, because I think there were certain things happening then that have been to some degree lessened or lost. And I have an aesthetic that is very much about the union of the mechanics of the vocal science, but very much wedded to the heart. And a purely mechanical way of singing seems kind of ridiculous to me because we are not machines. We have mechanics, but we are not machines. We are inspired by divine fire. And I'm looking for that, for the mechanism to be the mirror of your heart and your soul. I'm not looking for it to just a sound. I'm looking for a sound that reflects all of who you are and all of what that you have to say. And so with that as my guiding principle, I kind of filled in the mechanics that helped facilitate that.
So do you feel like you stumbled across that, or was there an aha moment that really?
There was a lot of trial and error. There were some teachers of the way that gave me pieces of the puzzle, although I synthesized it together honestly on my own, and working with a lot of wonderful singers who were willing to be guinea pigs in my young teaching. I think the most important thing a singer, a voice teacher can have is a great ear, even more importantly than understanding vocal mechanics, because no matter how much you know about vocal mechanics, if you don't have a great and insightful ear that really hears into the many levels that a sound has. A sound is not one thing, a sound is many things. And a really great ear will listen to the various levels and hear what's missing, be it a release in the tongue root or some trauma that's being suppressed and therefore suppressing the person's breathing. I think you need to have so that those many, many years when I would just attend so many performances and listen to so many records, and back then there were records.
I've listened to cassettes, so yeah.
I've done records, cassettes, CDs, mini discs, and now YouTube. Funny. In any case, I'm interested in really listening on a very profound level, and I actually teach listening as part of, when I give my vocal courses, I mostly teach privately, but I do also have a vocal institute that I give every year in both Canada and Europe. And one of the things that's taught is listening. I guide people through listening because until you hear something, you don't realize that you're not hearing it.
Yeah.
We don't know we don't know what we're not hearing. In the same way, unless a great chef brings you through a meal, you might not know what you're tasting, really in a refined way. Or a great painter will tell you what your eye isn't perceiving. And I think that being that we're living in an increasingly loud, noisy, boisterous culture, amplified culture, fine listening is really being lost. I can tell you, in my many years of going to theaters, I can tell by the audience response how much less fineness there is in the way people perceive sound.
I I agree, and I use listening in my teaching as well.
Hmm.
But not only, I think listening is really super important, because not only do I do it for a vocal, like listening to those vocal nuances, but it's imperative in acting to really be listening and to listen to your partner. And even I have had teachers listen to the ambiance, what's happening around you, so
Hmm.
so you can tune in and ground yourself to that.
Yes.
But I also think in when I'm life coaching, that listening is so imperative. Listening to your heart, listening to to your body, to the things around you, to in a relationship. I mean, really,
Actually listening rather than just thinking about the next thing you're going to say.
yes, yes, like truly being in there. And I tell you, it is one of the hardest things because of what you just said. There's so many things coming at us, and it's so loud and so boisterous. And it's not only sound that's loud, right? But it's the loudness of the information that's coming to us.
And the
And
noise in our own minds.
yeah, absolutely. So how do you how would you help somebody balance that, like in your private voice studio, to say, okay, let's stop and let's really tune in and listen?
The very first thing I always do with anyone is ask them how they are and ask them then to close their eyes, go inside of themselves, and without trying to judge, without trying to understand, formulate, name, just feel what's going on in their bodies, particularly their belly, but everywhere else as well, but particularly the belly, being that it's usually our feeling center. And observe what's going on there and breathe through what's ever going on there without judgment, with no need to change or fix. Realistically, you can do artistic work from any place within yourself if you're willing to be wherever that is.
I love that. And I think I remember my first lesson with you, and you having me not recreate, right? Just trying to feel. And I struggled with that. Like, and I tell my students, I sat there for an hour doing the same exercise, and yet it was life-changing. I mean, truly life-changing, to go inside and to just breathe and focus on my breathing and focus on my relaxation of my mechanism, because it had me, listen and feel what was going on inside.
It's interesting. After I do that, and we've done doing breathing exercises and working on what it is to have an open throat and good alignment, the first thing I'll ask people to do, the first sound that I'll ask people to make, is the action of sighing. And of course, we always sigh. We sigh many times in a day. But the minute you ask a person to do it consciously, they can't do it at all.
Right?
They try to make the sound of a sigh or the idea of a sigh rather than actually sighing, which is an extremely connecting and expressive gesture. So I'm looking right from the very beginning that sound is about connection and expression. And then we develop better and better mechanics to facilitate more and more interesting musical possibilities. But it's got to start not with the sound, it starts with the connection.
And so that connection is to your body, it's to your spirit, it's to your emotion. What?
All of that, absolutely. And to really allow things to be as they are. It's very funny. When people come in and I ask, how you doing? And they say, I'm great, I can't wait to sing today. I always think, oh no. Because usually when people do that, they've already decided that they're going to sing fantastically, and so they're already in the future. And of course, the only place good singing can happen is in the present. So oddly enough, when people come in and they say, I'm feeling a little down, and maybe I'm about to get sick, I'm a little, I don't know, we'll just see what it's going to be. And then those are the voice lessons that always go really well because they're resigned to being in the present. Whatever happens is okay.
So I want to dive into that, allowing things to be as they are, because I think that is such a powerful lesson in life. I mean, here we are right now in the middle of some really interesting times. We're right in the middle of the coronavirus. You are in New York City in complete lockdown, basically. I'm here in California. We're in complete lockdown but we have a little more space than you have in New York City. But how in times like this can you be creative and sing and allow things to be as they are when things seem so turbulent?
Well, what I'm finding I have to spend more time than usual doing is really being with people's anxiety. Obviously, it's a very anxious time. And so I spend more time than usual asking people just to be with their anxiety, breathe through it, not try to change it, accept it. Sometimes I'll ask them to do some kind of mantra, which is kind of like a parenting mantra, like, I'm here for you, I'm keeping you safe, or something like that, where they are empowered to be taking care of themselves. So rather than being in this victim kind of place of, oh my God, something terrible is going to happen to me, to be in this place of power and protection. And it usually gets people ready to then do real work. And I will say, oddly enough, I'm teaching only via the internet right now on Skype or FaceTime. And some people are doing some of the best work of their careers.
Interesting, because my mother said the exact same thing. She said in her studio, as it's all virtual right now, she said exactly the same thing, that people are singing better than they've ever sung. Yeah.
Well, I guess realistically, the people who are choosing to take virtual lessons are the people who really love it and it feeds their heart and soul in a very difficult time. And so there's that special passion really in the air. I was watching a podcast with Audrey McDonald last week, and she said something that made such sense to me. She said, this crisis is simply making everyone be in the present because we don't know what the future will bring. So, and we don't have anything to do right now. We all have to stay in our apartments. So it forces us to be present. And I thought, yeah, that is true. Even in my own life, where I practice presence on a daily basis, I have a very busy life. I'm constantly traveling, planning my travel. I'm going to see people performances. I'm generally very much on the move. And now, outside of my internet teaching, I'm in my apartment. I'm not planning to my next European trip or whatever. And it is an interesting exercise. And okay, this is to be doing nothing and just be with yourself. I'm enjoying it now, but then again, we're only into the 9th day of the lockdown. So we'll see where I am on 3rd, 4th week. But
right, we're over 2 weeks now.
Oh.
But yeah.
How's it going?
It's going. It took me 2 weeks to find flour, and that was a little frustrating to me. I was like, I just need a full thing of flour so I can feel like I'm safe. I don't know why that is that for me, but anyway, but okay, let's dive back just a second. So how does allowing things to be as they are, how does that bring peace or serenity or the ability to sing or create better?
Well, we can only create from where we are. If we're spending time at war with where we are, then that's sucking our energy and our creativity away because we're in a state of resistance to what is, so then we can't really create from that place. It is essential, and oddly enough, besides doing a lot of work on presence and doing a lot of reading, study on it, oddly enough and sadly, the place I learned this most was in my acting training, and I really look upon that with kind of horror and regret that no voice teacher ever brought that into the lesson, and yet it's just crazy that actors should be taught to listen, actors should be taught to be in their bodies, and singers who they are their instrument, their entire body is their instrument, are not necessarily taught how to be in their bodies generally. In my experience, it's very rare that that's actually taught. You're told what to do, but you're not told how to do it in the sense of, okay, first you have to be fully present in your body. Let's not try to talk about what you should do with your tongue or lips or jaw or spine or diaphragm or intercostals or pelvic floor. If you can't actually feel them or have any kind of mastery over them, because you're not sensate in those parts of your body. You only have an intellectual concept, not a sensual concept.
And with acting, they dive into that. So you can feel the emotion, right? And that's what so many, I remember in college, this great divide between the music theater students and the acting students, really because of that.
Yes.
Right?
Which is, I don't know, just seems crazy to me. Singers need to have more access to their bodies, not less than actors. It's every little thing that's happening in your body creates a different kind of sound. To really have an excellent technique and an excellent way of singing, every muscle in your body has to be cooperating. Anything that doesn't is going to limit your breathing, create tension in your throat, cut out overtones, cut out expression.
And it was actually in a dance class, or a few dance classes for me, that awakened the importance of posture to me. At this huge aha moment, and the change of my vocal sound because of the way I was standing. It was so simple.
Yeah.
Very, very, very.
Nowadays, that is being taught, like Alexander technique is more commonly taught in Feldenkrais, so at least that is entering the lexicon for singers in their training. But simple, just, okay, before we talk about anything, changing anything about your vocal technique, we first have to get you into your body so you have access to then therefore changing and optimizing the function of your body. There's no point in talking about what your tongue should be doing if you can't feel your tongue. There's no point in feeling how your neck can release if you can't feel your neck.
Yes.
Singers, I will say, singers tend to be notoriously stuck in their heads in a way that actors generally are not.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Okay, so what do you feel, we're changing like 180 degrees for just a second, but what do you consider to be your greatest accomplishment?
Well, I hope, I believe that I really help facilitate people really getting deeply in touch with their bodies and their hearts, sometimes healing traumas even, and then letting that be expressed in a very beautiful, expressive way that speaks to all people, because we all have been through these things. And when a person sings from that, we listen from that, and it's healing. So I think there's a certain kind of gorgeous healing that happens in live performance between a great performer and their audience. I think there's a real reason for the performing arts, and particularly for acoustic performing arts, which there's less and less of it happening. But there's something about an unamplified sound that comes through space from heart to heart, that when that happens, that is simply transcendent, for me anyway.
I completely agree. And that, you said something exactly like that when I was like, I have to connect with this man. Okay, so what advice would you give for somebody who is following their dreams?
Okay, very important and seemingly very simple. If you're not improving, you're not improving. Meaning I think one of to speak about my own profession, and maybe this is not the most politic thing to say, but many people are sold on the dream. I certainly was when I was young. Oh, it'll happen, it takes time. But honestly, basically, progress only can happen now. Progress does not happen in the future. Progress only happens now. So whoever you're working with, be it for your voice or acting or dancing, whatever it is, if you don't feel on some level enlightened, changed, nourished, something new happens. If it's not happening, it's not happening. So don't think, oh, it'll happen at some point in the future. It happens, you don't change everything overnight, but something changes. If it's not, then honestly, you probably need to be either seeking out new advice or confronting yourself about what's blocking you.
Interesting. Yeah. I remember you saying once something about uh, we as artists need to be creative in how we go about the work. If we are really in the business and we are called, it's like that, then sometimes we have to create the opportunities creatively.
Absolutely. Artists, it is wise for any artist to, it's a business where you can very easily feel like everyone else has the power. So whenever you can create your own work, create your own opportunities, definitely do so.
Yeah. Yeah. That, I think that advice led me to opening a theater company in Virginia, and led me to do, truly different things with my gifts, because it wasn't going down a traditional pathway. So
How cool.
yeah, I think that's so true. And then for you, I think we've touched on this whole time, but for you, what is the key to living authentically, passionately, and courageously?
I mean, I can tell you what it is for me. I think everyone has to, of course, find their own path. I, I don't know what it's like to not live passionately, honestly, because I don't, this is hard. I don't know if everyone is given a grand passion. I think for some people, life is just kind of pleasant and okay, and they choose a career because it's just a nice way to make a living and they'll be able to support themselves. I'm not sure if everyone has grand passions. I was one of those, honestly, kind of insane people that had such a hunger that I really honestly felt I would die if I didn't do this. And now that sounds very melodramatic, and maybe it was very melodramatic, but I was very young. And I had to be in the performing arts. And the times when it seemed like it wasn't going to work out, honestly, it felt like death.
Mm.
One of the things Lamperti says in Vocal Wisdom is he says, don't sing unless you die if you didn't. And I was just one of those people that if I didn't, it would be death. And I'm not sure if that's, my concern about saying that is that then if a person doesn't feel that way, I don't want them to feel diminished or that they're in any way less than. I believe in being true to who you are. And if that's not you, don't presume it's supposed to be you. That was me. That was just me. I just had these incredible hungers, and those hungers led me to some great places. Also, it led me to some great pain and suffering. Luckily, at this point in my life, things have worked out better than I ever imagined, but that was not always the case. And somehow my passion was always larger than my pain.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure if that's the case for everyone. I don't know. I only know what it is to be me.
I don't know. But I also think that there could be a difference between that kind of passion and, like you said, being true to yourself. And I think figuring out who you are is being authentic.
Absolutely. And I would say, I mean, when we're children, we grow up in a family, so that has a certain way of seeing the world. And then we grow up within a community, and then there's a certain way of seeing the world, and then our country and the culture of that. So we're given a certain set of this is the way the world works. But of course, that's the way our world works, or my personal world works. And we, of course, at first, as narcissistic young people, we presume that is the world. And I do think it's wise as you get older to recognize, no, that is my world, or the world I've been living in. And then to become a real adult, I think it's important to question, okay, well, this is the world I was born into. How much of this do I really buy into? How much of it don't I? And I think that's really important to have the courage to do that. And it's frightening for people because you feel like you could be threatening your attachments to important people in your life. And it doesn't have to be that, but with some people it is. That, okay, by my being authentic might mean that this person won't like me, or this person is going to be disappointed in me. That's, of course, everybody's individual journey about what you're willing to pay. I will say that it worked out for me. I can only speak for myself because I know people who've had terrible experiences as they tried to be authentic and had to really lose people that were very central in their lives because that person was not willing to accept the new person, the more authentic person. Because in being authentic, you gain and you lose, realistically. And the question is, how much do you want authenticity? For me, it was a no-brainer. I just had to follow this path. And luckily, most of the important people in my life, went along with it on some level or not. There's some who were very much there for me, and some who were less so. Quite frankly, a sad part of human beings is, when I got successful, more people were willing to go along with me. When I was struggling, there were less people, validating it all, of course. But I just had to do it.
Well, go ahead.
Well, in terms of advice, I think you just have to ask yourself, what price are you paying to be inauthentic? And is it a price you're really willing over the long term to pay? I have a student right now who's in an abusive relationship, and she's a wonderful, very talented singer, a very intelligent, wonderful woman. You would think, well, why should this person be? She can see that it's an abusive relationship, and yet she's truly not able to leave it at this point. And so I've been, working with her, of course, and supporting her choice even to stay. Not to say that she should stay, but supporting. Okay, please know I respect where you are, and although I honestly hope you get into a place where a relationship that is more truly authentically loving. I understand that right now that's not a jump you're ready to make. So I recommended some books so that she can little by little take in new information, process it, and see if at some point she can either make this a better relationship, which honestly I doubt is possible, but who knows, or leave it and get into something that's much more authentically loving. Everyone has to take their own journey. I believe in consciousness. So one of the things in my teaching that I do is I challenge people's consciousness, honestly. If somebody's saying something that I know not to be true, I'll say, are you sure that's true? So what leads you to believe that that is true? Are you aware that science says such and such? Or are you aware that when you say that, honestly, I hear you, the words you're saying, but your body is telling me something very different. Let me just tell you what I see and what your body's saying. I do honestly challenge people.
And how does that affect the voice?
Well, a lot.
Right? I'm sitting here thinking, wow.
We can't cut off parts of ourselves selectively. If we're repressing, we don't repress just the negative. If we're repressing, we're repressing the highs and the lows, the good and the bad. And that always evidences itself in the breathing mechanism. This is scientifically proven, by the way. This is not just me talking. We repress things by doing something called compartmentalization, where if we're feeling something we don't want to feel or thinking something we don't want to think, we stop breathing and basically shove it down somewhere in our body. And then we stop breathing until it's well shoved away. And then I start breathing normally. For that reason, I'm sure you've had this experience with students yourself, and I'm sure many of the teachers out there have had this experience. When you get someone to really breathe deeply, some of them really just spontaneously sob, because deep breathing loosens up those things that we've pushed down and locked away. The deep breathing actually loosens these things and releases things, puts you in contact with things.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you said that, because I had an experience. I was singing pretty well, and when my divorce happened, and all of a sudden I was divorced after 25 years of marriage, and I went to sing, and I could not sustain a phrase. I couldn't get a deep breath, no matter how much I tried and how much I was like, okay, my mom would say this, Neil would say this. And no matter what my education and my learning was there, I just physically couldn't do it. And it's taken me 3 years to be able to go, oh, I can get through a phrase without having to go, I'm just.
Well, and I'm not sure if you want to share this with your audience, but I mean, looking back on it, what do you think was holding? What would have happened had you taken a deep breath early on in that process?
I absolutely would have just sobbed, but I think I would have sobbed for years.
Well, see, this is really important. I think it's really important that you're saying that. It's important for your audience that they hear you saying that, because that is, and I hope you know I love you, and I hope it's okay to say this.
Oh no, absolutely.
That is what everyone says before they just do it. The reality is, yes, you would have needed to sob, and you might have sobbed for a while. You wouldn't have sobbed for a year. That I can tell you, no well of tears is that deep. You might have sobbed for an hour or two, and then 3 hours later sobbed for another half hour, and then the next day sobbed again. But the reality is, letting that pain flow allows it to slowly leave you. And that's the first part of healing.
And I probably would have been able to heal a little bit faster.
Except in wartime, and oddly enough, you and I are now talking at a time where we're basically in wartime with the coronavirus. This is, on a certain level, wartime, where we have to take wartime measures, which means I don't care how you feel, don't come within 6 feet of me. We really have to be vigilant in a way that one only has to be in wartime, so that as few people are affected by this horrible virus as possible. So I really do look at the difference between when one is in a war, and there are many ways of being in a war, by the way. If you're in an abusive situation, you're in a war. I mean, there are many kinds of wars. But singing can't really happen when you're still in a wartime footing, because when you're in a wartime footing, your body is being pumped with hormones that are making it possible for you to either fight, flee, or freeze. And we cannot be in one of those states to really sing, because singing requires incredibly fine motor coordination. So therefore, if you just really feel what's going on and let things flow, let yourself cry if you need to, let all that passion express itself, at very least for a little while, that the torrent of it will subside, and you will be able to get on to a non-wartime footing, and then sing really well. So the reason why I think that so many people are singing really well now is probably you, your mother, we're spending time with people to help them, at least for the moment of that lesson, come out of the wartime they're in. And then they have all this feeling because of everything that's going on, and they're free to channel it into their singing because you've created a space that's safe for them to do so.
I love that. I love that. And I just think that is beautiful. Because truly our voice, whether it be in singing, in speaking, in expressing ourselves, no matter how we're expressing ourselves, our voice does have a deep spiritual, emotional connection to who we are, and to who we were, and really to who we will be, but mostly because it comes from who we are right now.
And when you sing from that, your listeners listen from that. We lead the listening.
It connects us.
Yeah, you sing from your heart, we will listen from our heart. You sing from your head, we'll listen from our heads.
And truly what's going to connect us and heal us as a world is that connection from the heart. I just truly believe that. And you have been such an incredible inspiration for me in that way.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
So thank you so much. So we were talking about a gift that you have, and it's right along this line that we were just talking about. Would you like to share?
Yes, well, I have a website, which is simply my name, neilsemer.com, NeilSemer.com. And I've written a lot of articles on spiritual and emotional topics. One is called What is Control, for example, because people have a very false idea often about what vocal control is. What most people would call control, I would call tension or gripping. And what most people would call feeling out of control, but executing the plan that I give them, that is control. And control in singing, control in swimming requires just falling on your back and allowing the buoyancy of water to float you. And then you learn what to do with your arms and legs to maneuver through the water. That falling on your back is terrorizing when you first do it. but it's the first moment of actual control. It feels like a loss of control because you're not holding onto the side of the pool, but it's actually the first moment of real control when you want to learn to swim. You have to jump off the twig, a bird has to jump off a twig and then learn how to fly by learning how to flap their wings and ride thermals. There is a certain loss of control or loss of grab that is essential to finding real control. So that's one of my topics that is of very much importance to me. There's also something I've called the 3-word diet, where I very often don't let people talk too much in lessons because I find the more people talk, the less they tend to say. And so I often put people on what I call the 3-word diet, and I give them the first 2 words. So it's really a 1-word diet, which is I feel, and you're only allowed 1 word. Because if you say I feel good, I feel happy, I feel sad, I feel tight, I feel free, that's a real feeling. If I say, I feel that at the moment that I sang that F sharp, I was a little tight, I really could do it this way, you're already way separated from your own experience and you're in a less helpful place. Something else, another article called, are you a plan A or plan B singer? Meaning plan A I define as really coming from an inspired, free place, and plan B is a fear-based, I want to make sure disaster doesn't happen place. And other articles, on these themes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and such a great gift. And thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom and your insight and your spirit with us today.
Well, thanks so much, Heather. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for another interview and day of unleashing the authentic artist. And hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.